That's what the way I found it was.
Okay.
OHRC YouTube.
Yeah, I just Googled OHRC YouTube and.
You don't get enough money. I looked into it, trust me.
I see it now.
Because you're
That's
down
on
like,
your phone?
it's like, not even that. And then you're not covered by benefits.
Just tell me if I walk across the
Well,
wheel
there's
slide.
about a 15-second delay.
And then with 60% of your salary, you can't afford to buy that stuff, right?
I need you to tell me.
It's kind of disgraceful, really.
There's a 20-second delay,
Well, there was 15 last
You
time.
got hit by a car.
so you can come back and
Got
watch.
car. Right?
Roughly,
You know,
sometimes it's less than that, but
And then you end
Well,
up
that's
living,
why-
and then
I
you
don't
end
have
up
any
living in a
delay
really
turned on.
state like crap, right?
there you
That's
go.
why they say,
See, there you,
Didn't have one.
supplemental.
Oh, okay. I'm happy.
Yes.
We're now streaming.
Yes, stuff that will cover up. Two, I think that's what you.
Well attended.
No, it says on the president's side. Yes, well, I'll put that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I did what he said. So let's see if it went. Have you done a judging event? Have you done a judging event? On the tour? This year? Yeah. Did they have a setup? Because last time I did, you just sort of showed up. Is that what he does? Yeah, yeah. So it's gonna be outside. Here's an overhang. What? Why not? Matter of rain.
So I look like a.
Okay, so I gotta blow when This was CBC station. I'm gonna share with this one.
You know what? You're right back on session.
I'll send her later.
I can do this.
The nose it's new to, it's very new to us as well. It's not insurmountable. We've been having the same realization with our webinars. So we like to post them every time. But we've now taken zooming in right on the presentation. The webinar is set up as live chat. The chat becomes much of the chat becomes irrelevant. The questions and answers that the presenter addresses are all on audio anyway. And then we do proper closed captioning for that. So basically, so we have, so there's a closed captioning afterwards is actually the hardest part. There's rather inexpensive software that helps with the editing. So Sony movie studio that first when we started it, now we've got something a little bit higher end. So, what I found was to do, we're under obligation to do proper closed captioning. Yes. And that, so the closed captioning work that was done on the spot live was not accurate. So that took longer. It took maybe 15 minutes to kind of from an hour to hour or two to close captioning.
Yeah, I was just sure clear. We'll get it.
I just, if I am on camera already, then I can make sure I'm in the shot.
Oh, yes.
Not that it's only this way.
Yeah.
No, we did have someone stand there.
Yeah, so we just need to
Then you
check
guys
it.
are different. My code's different.
Yeah.
I know everything else.
I think so. No, I think it'll be trying to catch all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good. No, that's what I stay on your desk. You don't get it.
You gotta park in one of those lots.
So the OHRC's YouTube channel, so I
Like, just go on YouTube. So, is my eyeline to you?
You could,
Is my eyeline to you or
oh, sorry, to the camera.
to the camera and where?
Well, that's fine, you can, yeah, because you can move in a little further away.
Here?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine?
Yeah.
And you see me this and this.
Oh yeah, even a bit lower.
Okay, but I need this much
Yes,
space.
absolutely.
So if I look from there, I'm not
Yeah.
catching.
That's,
That's okay if I look up there? No. It should be.
that's probably 17.
No, 17.
Although for captioning, maybe it would be better so that she looks at you, because you're doing the live caption. Yeah, actually. Where's the, that's the camera.
Camera's right there.
That would be the camera.
That's the live stream.
That's the live stream.
That's what I wanna, okay. I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I was actually going to sit down.
No problem.
If I'm looking at you, is that right, that camera?
Jay? Yeah.
Sure.
Where's the live stream? YouTube?
YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, she's got the same sort of Google eyes.
Yeah.
Same mouth, so.
Yeah. That's what I was.
The look of wonder, right?
Yeah, let's just.
I'll send you this.
Okay.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Rosemary Parker. I'm the Manager of Communications and Issues Management of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. We're here this morning to make a major announcement related to accessible education for students with reading disabilities. Before we proceed, the OHRC would like to recognize the long history and contribution of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in Ontario and Canada, and show respect today for the Mississauga of the new credit. We'll feature three speakers this morning and then open things up for media questions. To begin, I invite OHRC Chief Commissioner Renu Mendani to introduce the initiatives we're launching today.
For over 20 years, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has promoted the right to education for students with disabilities. The Commission has developed policies and cases and been involved in cases at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and the Supreme Court of Canada. Yet, we continue to hear from parents, students, and educators that the needs of students with disabilities are not being met in Ontario public schools. Ontario's Education Act recognizes that all students must be provided with the opportunity to realize their potential and develop into highly skilled, knowledgeable, caring citizens who contribute to society. As recently as Monday, the government affirmed the importance of inclusive and accessible public education. Indeed, public education is essential to our economy and our democracy. When students with disabilities are left behind, Ontario is less inclusive and less prosperous. That is why today, to mark Learning Disability Awareness Month and Dyslexia Awareness Month, the Commission is launching a public inquiry into human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities in Ontario public schools. This province-wide inquiry will assess whether school boards are using scientific, evidence-based practices that allow students to obtain the reading skills they need to succeed in school, work, and life. Put simply, the inquiry will evaluate whether Ontario's public schools are realizing the right to read. In classrooms across Ontario, there are children who fail to learn to read. Many would be surprised to learn that Canada and Ontario rank below Russia, China, and the United States in reading. EQAO results show that more years, over half of grade 3 students with disabilities did not meet the provincial standard. This is unacceptable. Learning to read is not a frill. It is not a privilege. It is a basic and essential skill, and learning to read is a human right. The United Nations recognizes that people's ability to read is essential to the cultural, political, social, and economic growth of a society. Yet there are students in classrooms across Ontario who cannot read. These students will struggle in all aspects of school, from language to math. They're more vulnerable to mental health disabilities, behavioral issues, bullying, and dropping out. And problems continue beyond school. People with low literacy are often underemployed and overrepresented in our homeless population and in our jails. They're more likely to attempt suicide. Many children who struggle with reading have a learning disability. Dyslexia, for example, affects about 10% of the population. Despite this prevalence, the Commission is concerned that students with reading disabilities are not getting the supports they need. The parent of an 8-year-old girl told us, without timely remediation, her daughter is entering grade 3, barely able to read. Last year, her daughter asked Santa Claus for a unique present, the power to read. The parent of a 14-year-old boy told us that her son was not assessed for a learning disability until grade 7, and as a result, he's reading at a grade 2 level. She said that watching her son struggle has made her sad. She said that she feels like she has failed as a parent. We heard from many more parents right across Ontario who are frustrated with the system and scared about their children's future. These concerns are all the more troubling because reading disabilities can be remediated with early screening, intervention, and support. Indeed, parents expect public schools to adopt science-based approaches that allow their children to learn to read. Parents expect that educators will use curriculum and teaching methods that are effective for the largest number of students. Parents expect that students will be screened as early as possible to identify potential issues. Parents expect that students will be supported with early interventions that are evidence-based. Parents expect that students will get timely and effective accommodations when they need them. And parents expect that students who need them will be provided with psychoeducational assessments in a timely manner. These are reasonable expectations, and they are essential to the right to read. The Commission's inquiry will assess whether boards are meeting these expectations. We will assess whether public schools are using scientific, evidence-based approaches to meet the needs of students with reading disabilities. The Commission's inquiry is provincial in scope. We will hear from parents, from students and educators from across Ontario. we will investigate practices across a representative sample of 8 school boards. These include boards from different parts of the province, urban and rural, boards that serve larger proportions of Indigenous, racialized, and newcomer students, boards with different socioeconomic demographics, boards with varying special education plans, and boards that are currently part of the government's pilot project using Empower, a reading intervention program. To be clear, we have included boards with EQAO results that fall both above and below the provincial standard for reading. The boards we have selected are representative of issues that are provincial in scope and impact. The school boards we will obtain information from are Hamilton Wentworth, Keewatin Patricia, Lakehead, London Catholic, Ottawa Carleton, Peel, Simcoe Muskoka Catholic, and Thames Valley. We will assess these boards against 5 benchmarks that are widely recognized as essential to an effective and systematic approach to teaching reading. This systematic approach is more cost-effective than the current wait-and-see approach focused on individual accommodation. These 5 benchmarks are, first, the use of universal design for learning. Second, mandatory early screening. Third, the use of effective reading intervention programs. Fourth, appropriate accommodation. And fifth, timely psychoeducational assessments. First, we will look at whether boards adopt curriculum and teaching methods that are effective for the largest number of students. This approach is often referred to as universal design for learning. In 2006, Ontario moved towards the whole language approach to reading, which focuses on predicting words based on their meaning and sentence structure. This approach is not backed by science. In contrast, the same year, 2006, England listened to experts and adopted a universal design approach involving structured literacy. This approach emphasizes phonics, or the relationship between sounds in speech and the written word. Today, England outperforms Ontario on nearly every measure of literacy. Our inquiry will explore whether Ontario should adopt this back-to-basics approach. In terms of early screening, we know that time is of the essence when it comes to reading disabilities. Our inquiry will look at whether boards are mandating the use of scientific evidence-based screening tools in kindergarten or grade 1 to identify students who may have reading disabilities. This is another measure that England implemented back in 2012. We'll also look at the availability and use of reading intervention programs like Empower, developed by Sick Kids Hospital. We will explore whether boards provide effective accommodation, because even with early intervention, students with reading disabilities may require and are entitled to receive accommodation. These accommodations may include using assistive technologies like screen readers, alternative formats for assignments, or extra time on tests. Finally, we will consider whether there is clear criteria for when psychoeducational assessments are offered and required, and how waiting lists are managed and maintained. Beyond looking at this representative sample of school boards, the Commission may request information or assistance from the Ministry of Education, the Ontario College of Teachers, and faculties of education. We'll hear from parents, students, and educators across the province and visit communities served by boards identified in our inquiry. The Commission has retained Dr. Linda Siegel, an internationally recognized expert in reading disabilities, to assist us with the inquiry. We will release an inquiry report with findings and recommendations in 2020. Of course, this timeline depends on when we receive information from school boards. Given yesterday's events and the present uncertainty, we will work with boards to understand their capacity and develop realistic timelines. Our ultimate goal is to make the right to read a reality for students with reading disabilities. Thank you.
We have worked for many years on issues affecting people with disabilities, including working to advance accessible education. But we've not done this work on our own. We continue to rely on the experience and the insight of communities that are most affected by discrimination. We've invited 2 speakers today to add their perspectives to the impact of not receiving an equitable education because of reading disabilities. I now invite Lark Barker to share her thoughts on the inquiry and some of the issues she can hopefully help to, or she thinks it can hopefully help to resolve. Lark is president of Decoding Dyslexia Ontario and a passionate advocate for children with dyslexia and reading disabilities. A veteran special education teacher, she's worked on a variety of school settings in Canada and abroad. She's the proud mother of 2 sons, one of whom is dyslexic. Lark.
Thank you. Decoding Dyslexia Ontario applauds the Ontario Human Rights Commission's decision to launch a public inquiry into possible discrimination against children with dyslexia and other reading disabilities by Ontario Public Schools. This inquiry responds to concerns that we hear every day raised by students and their parents. We hope it will bring to light the systematic and structural barriers faced by thousands of children across the province. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability, affecting at least 2 children in every classroom. It runs in families and knows no boundaries. Anyone can be dyslexic, no matter their sex, age, race, language, or socioeconomic status. Dyslexia is not related to intelligence, meaning that these children are able to succeed at school alongside their peers. They need early and effective instruction and support, which is currently denied to them in the public schools province-wide. As a grassroots parents group, we hear from families who are frustrated with the lack of awareness, services, and support in our public education system. Many of these parents are also dyslexic and have experienced multi-generational discrimination. Their stories are truly heartbreaking. They tell us they are being denied timely identification, assessment, and effective reading instruction, that they are paying for specialized tutoring in private schools just to ensure that their children learn to read. Many others tell us that they cannot afford to pay for these services and watch helplessly as their children fall behind their peers at school. The heavy emotional weight that comes with this is devastating, as students with learning disabilities are more likely to drop out of school, be under and unemployed, and experience mental health issues. The current wait to fail approach for students with reading disabilities and dyslexia is not acceptable in our province that guarantees the right to education for all. We are grateful for the Commission's commitment to pursue this human rights issue in our public education system. We want to thank students and their parents for sharing their stories with us. We hope that this inquiry will help you feel less alone, give voice to your concerns, and lead to recommendations that will pave the way for change. Thank you.
I now invite Alicia Smith to say a few words to help us look at the issue from a lived experience perspective. Alicia is president-elect of the Ontario branch of the International Dyslexia Association. She's also a person with dyslexia and the mother of a son with dyslexia. Early in life, Alicia worked hard to try to hide her dyslexia, leaving university early to train and work as a chef. She later returned to school to study web development and computer science. After her son was identified as dyslexic, Alicia became passionate about supporting him and others facing similar experiences, and now speaks openly about her own challenges. Alicia.
Thank you. As you heard, I'm the president-elect of the International Dyslexia Association, but today I've been asked to share my personal story as a mother. I want to start by asking you to imagine reading these words from your child. Grade 3 was the worst year of my life. I couldn't read and everyone else could. I felt like a complete and total idiot. Sometimes I wished I would just die so I could stop feeling so stupid. I remember the teacher handing out tons of worksheets covered in words I couldn't read. I would sit and stare out the window, trying to be very quiet, hoping that she would just forget I existed. That's the opening of a letter that my 10-year-old son wrote to our MPP about his experience with dyslexia. What breaks my heart, even more than knowing how alone and hurt he felt for so long, is knowing that if my husband and I didn't have the time, money, and ability to advocate for him, nothing would have changed. But my child is lucky. How is he lucky? When we went to the school and were told that he could not access special education services until after he had had a psychoeducational assessment, and then we're told that the wait list for an assessment was so long that he would likely not be seen until he went to high school, he was lucky because we could afford to pay for a private assessment. But what if we couldn't? And when we brought the report back to the school, showing that our son was gifted but struggling with dyslexia, and the school told us that the best that they could do was to offer accommodations. They could teach him to live with his limitations so that he could get by in school without needing to read or write. But they didn't have the time or resources available to dedicate to teaching him to read. He was lucky because he had parents who could advocate for him and win him the right to remedial reading instruction. But what if he didn't? And when, even after getting one-on-one time with a wonderful and caring special education teacher, he was still frustrated and not making progress. He was lucky because that's when I found IDA Ontario. I learned about dyslexia and the science of reading. I was shocked to learn that the instructional strategies mandated by the Ontario curriculum are not based in science. Our curriculum is based on assumptions about reading that date back to the 1960s that have been thoroughly disproven. For at least the past 20 years, we have known that these strategies do not work for children with dyslexia. Yet these were the strategies that were taught to him in his regular classroom, that we used with him at home night after night, and that were used with him in his first experiences in special education. But again, he was lucky because he had a parent at home who had the time and energy to learn about the science of reading and effective instruction. But what about the kids who don't? I'm not a teacher. I'm dyslexic myself, yet by using a different approach, I was able to teach my child to read. And he's doing great now, and I'm so proud of how much hard work you put in trying to catch up, but it's still a constant struggle. I hope that this inquiry will be both a moment of reckoning and a turning point for the culture of education in this province, and that the findings of this inquiry will help us move forward together to embrace the science of reading so that every child can realize their right to read and no more children sit silently at their desks wishing they didn't exist.
Thanks, Alicia. We want to hear directly from parents, from other parents, students, educators, and others about their experience with reading disabilities in Ontario's public schools. We invite people to email us at legal@ohrc.on.ca or by phone. The numbers are listed on our website at www.ohrc.on.ca. We invite everyone to follow us on Twitter for updates. Our hashtag is Right to Read. I now invite our speakers to join me at the podium to take questions from the media, and I also invite our inquiry lawyers, Rima Khwaja and Nika Farhani, to join us as well. So if there are any questions from the media?
So if you could just explain us how the public inquiry will take place or will
Sure. So included in the media kit there are our terms of reference for the inquiry. We have also reached out personally to all of the affected boards as well as the ministry to advise them about the inquiry and next steps. So what we're imagining will happen next is a request for information from the different school boards. And that will really be focused on our 5 benchmarks and assessing whether the boards are able to meet those benchmarks. We will also be traveling to communities in the regions of the boards that we're inquiring into to hear directly from parents, students, and families. But this is a provincial inquiry, so we expect we will hear from parents and students and educators across the province. After that, after obtaining the information and analyzing it, we will write an inquiry report with findings and recommendations. We're hoping to do that in 2020.
How did you choose the school boards, and why is there no French school boards?
Okay, I'll answer both those questions. So first, in terms of picking the school boards, as I said, we wanted to find a representative sample in terms of geography, demographics, special education plans, EQA scores. So we worked with an expert, Dr. Linda Siegel, to identify what she believed and we believe is a representative sample. So the Auditor General, when she does her reports on education, uses a sample of 4. We've used a sample of 8. In terms of French, of course we expect we will hear from parents and students in the French immersion program and hear about those experiences. It isn't the focus of our inquiry, mostly because you have to adopt different strategies, and we think the 5 benchmarks that we have adopted are most applicable in terms of learning a first language, English, and that's the reasoning behind that.
But there are French schools, right, and French school boards that are not immersion, and they're learning their maternal language.
Yes, the French language schools.
Yes.
So that isn't in the scope of our inquiry because of sort of the complexity around the research into reading and how focused it is on English. But again, we expect to hear from parents and students who have experiences across all of public education.
Have you reached out to the Ministry of Education, and have they responded positively, or have you talked to them at all?
Yes, we did speak to the Deputy Minister of Education, and she welcomed the inquiry and said she hopes that it has findings and recommendations that'll be useful in terms of ensuring the right to read.
Why would we still be using a system that doesn't work to teach kids to read?
I guess that's a question for the ministry.
You said that learning to read is not a privilege, it's a human right. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so in 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada, in a case called Moore, looked at what children with reading disabilities, specifically dyslexia, are entitled to in the public education system, and found that the right to learn to read exists, and that students are entitled to accommodations and interventions that will allow them to learn to read.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming. I want to remind you that all of our materials are available online, and we have media kits here in the room. And we'd like to thank you for coming.
So